when I was publicly humiliated at my mother-in-law's birthday, turned the tables by freezing the family fortune, and my name's Ryan. I'm 33, and I've always known I didn't belong in Jenna's world. I grew up in small towns, worked my way through school, and never cared for fancy clothes or expensive restaurants. Jenna's family, though, they live for appearances, always chasing the next big show of wealth. Her mother, Darlene, is the queen of that circus. For as long as I've known her, she's treated me like an outsider, a placeholder until Jenna found someone who fit her vision of perfection. I guess I thought if I kept my head down and stayed respectful, they'd come around. That was a joke. Darlene turned 62 this year. And of course, the birthday party had to be something over the top. They rented out this fancy art gallery in Savannah, decorated it like a magazine spread, with strings of fake ivy, gold-rimmed glasses, and staff passing around tiny hors d'oeuvres that didn't even take the edge off your hunger. There was a quartet playing music nobody recognized, but everyone acted like they loved it. I stood by the bar most of the night, nursing one drink and trying not to get in the way. That's always been my role at these things: stay quiet, stay invisible, let them pretend I'm not there. The weird part started even before the party. Jenna bought me this button-down shirt, something in a shade of blue I'd never choose, and she kept insisting I wear it. She kept saying things like, "Please, Ryan, just for tonight, can you look like you belong here?" That stung more than I let on. Jenna never used to care about this kind of thing. When we first got together, she said what she loved about me was how real I was. Now, it felt like she wanted me to play dress up so I wouldn't embarrass her in front of her friends and family. I tried to brush it off, tried to tell myself it wasn't a big deal. But the digs kept coming, little comments about how Chase and his wife were always so polished, how they never fought in public. She made it sound like I was failing her just by being myself. I bit my tongue because I didn't want to ruin the night. I figured I could survive one more family gathering without incident. I was wrong. When Darlene stood up to make her speech, I thought she'd do what she always does: brag about the family, make herself the center of attention, maybe share a few forced emotional moments about overcoming hardships. She started that way, too, tears in her eyes, talking about family, tradition, how blessed she was. Then she shifted, and I could feel the tension in the room change. She turned and looked right at me, and I swear the air got heavier. She started talking about strong men, about how lucky some women were to have husbands who took care of their families, who gave them beautiful grandchildren to carry on the legacy. Then she said, "Not everyone can be so lucky." Her eyes locked on mine, her voice dripping with fake sweetness that made my stomach turn. There was this awkward pause, people looking around, not sure if they should laugh, but then she doubled down. "Let's all take a moment to laugh at my daughter's pathetic husband, the useless drifter who can't even give me grandchildren." Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. Some people actually clapped, as if it was some kind of joke they were in on. I looked at Jenna, hoping she'd say something, hoping she'd defend me. Instead, she smirked, leaned in toward the mic, and added, "At least he's good at cleaning toilets." That got a bigger laugh. Even Chase and Martin chuckled along like it was some lighthearted roast and not a full-on public humiliation. I felt frozen, standing there holding a plate of cheese and crackers that suddenly felt ridiculous in my hands. My face burned. My hands were shaking so bad I had to set the plate down on the nearest table before I dropped it. I looked around the room at all those polished, smirking faces, and I realized not one person was going to step in. Not one person saw anything wrong with what just happened. I wasn't a person to them. I was a joke, a prop for Darlene's big show. I thought for a second about storming out right then, but something in me snapped. I remembered the one thing they didn't know. I remembered that Darlene's precious lifestyle didn't exist because of her savvy or charm. It existed because Gordon trusted me with his estate when he got sick. Gordon knew his daughter would blow through the money, so he named me power of attorney. I was the one keeping the whole circus afloat, and they had no idea. That's when I decided I wasn't going to stand there and let them treat me like dirt. I slipped my phone out of my pocket, walked outside where it was quieter, and called Carla. My heart was pounding, but not from fear, pure rage. When Carla answered, I didn't hesitate. I told her I wanted all disbursements from the trust frozen immediately, No exceptions, no explanations. Carla paused for half a second before saying, "You sure about this, Ryan?" I told her I was dead sure. I ended the call and stood there for a minute, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter from inside. Then I went back in, walked right up to Darlene, leaned in just enough for her to hear, and said, "Enjoy poverty." I didn't raise my voice, didn't make a scene. I just said it and walked out before anyone could react. Jenna grabbed my arm at the door, nails digging into my skin, trying to stop me. She demanded to know what the hell I was doing. I told her to go ask her mother why she thought it was okay to humiliate me in front of everyone. She glared at me like I was the villain in all this, then let me go. I could hear the murmurs as I left, people asking what my problem was, whether I just threatened Darlene. I didn't care. I got in my car, drove home in silence, and sat on my couch with my dog, who seemed to be the only one in the world happy to see me. I thought about all the times I let this family walk all over me. I decided right then I wasn't going to let it happen again. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop, messages and missed calls flooding in before I'd even had coffee. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised, but part of me thought maybe they'd cool off overnight. Instead, Darlene had apparently spent the entire evening after I left whipping everyone into a frenzy. The first thing I saw was a string of texts from Jenna, everything from "you're overreacting" to "you're tearing this family apart" to "call me now, Ryan." The family group chat was even worse, filled with people I barely knew lecturing me about loyalty and respect. Not one of them seemed to care about what Darlene had said, about how she'd humiliated me in front of 100 people. All that mattered was that I'd walked out and done something they didn't understand. By the time I made it to the kitchen, my dog was at the door barking because someone was pounding on it like they were trying to break it down. I looked through the peephole and, of course, there stood Darlene, sunglasses on like she was dodging paparazzi, hair a mess, lips drawn tight in some mix of rage and desperation. Against my better judgment, I opened the door just a crack. She didn't waste a second, pushed past the door frame without asking, and launched into a tirade about how I was destroying everything she'd built, how I'd embarrassed her in front of friends and family. She called me heartless, a traitor, a thief, as if I'd stolen the money with some elaborate plan, instead of simply protecting what wasn't even hers to begin with. I stood there in my doorway, barely awake, listening as she tried to guilt-trip me about Jenna, about the family name, about how everyone would turn against me. When she tried to move further inside, I blocked her, telling her she needed to leave before things got even uglier. She actually raised her hand like she was about to slap me, but I caught her wrist before she could. I didn't squeeze or anything, just held it until she realized what she was doing and yanked it back. She stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to make the walls shake, leaving me standing there wondering how things had fallen apart so fast. The calls didn't stop. Jenna tried every angle, switching between sweet and furious in the space of a single message. One minute she was begging me to reconsider, talking about how we could work it out, and the next she was accusing me of being cold, selfish, the reason her mother was falling apart. I didn't answer most of them. I needed space to think, to figure out what came next, because I knew this wasn't the end of it. Sure enough, later that afternoon, Carla called to check in. She warned me that things were going to get messy, that Darlene wasn't the type to back down quietly. I told her I understood, that I wasn't going to change my mind, not after what they'd done. Carla told me to stay alert, that people like Darlene don't give up without a fight, and I thanked her before hanging up. The neighbors started noticing too. After Darlene's little scene, people in my building began giving me weird looks in the hallway, like I was the one causing trouble. It's funny how quickly the story gets twisted when someone loud enough spreads their version first. I kept my head down, tried to focus on work, walking the dog, anything that felt normal. But even at work, I could tell something was off. Colleagues asked if everything was okay at home, mentioned seeing cryptic posts online that seemed aimed at me. Darlene had started posting on social media about betrayal and heartbreak, playing the victim for anyone who'd listen. It didn't take long before friends of hers, people I'd met once at some dinner, started messaging me too, asking if I'd really done what she said, some even accusing me outright. I ignored most of it, blocked people when I had to, but the pressure kept building. I knew Darlene wouldn't stop with words. I started seeing her car parked near my building, just sitting there like she was waiting for me to come out so she could ambush me again. One day she did exactly that, catching me as I came back from walking the dog. She tried to corner me by the elevator, pleading 1 minute and accusing the next. She said I was ruining Jenna's life, destroying their family's future. I told her if she wanted the trust unfrozen, all she had to do was make a public apology, admit what she'd done at that party, own up to the humiliation she'd dished out. She turned red, completely lost it, and stormed off, Jenna trailing behind looking like she didn't know whether to cry or scream. It only got worse from there. They started trying to drag my family into it, sending long emails and messages to my parents, trying to make me look unstable, like I'd snapped and needed to be stopped. My mom called, worried, wanting to know what was really going on. I explained everything, told her about the party, about Darlene's speech, about how Jenna had stood there and joined in. My mom listened quietly and then told me to be careful, that people like Darlene don't play fair, that once you stand up to them, they'll do whatever it takes to make you look like the bad guy. I appreciated the warning, but I was already too deep in it to back down. Every day brought something new. More messages, more posts, more people coming out of the woodwork with opinions about something they didn't really understand. Walker even showed up at my place unannounced, banging on the door like he owned the place, shouting about how I needed to be a man and fix things before it was too late. I told him through the door that if he wanted money, he should talk to his mother, not me. He kicked the door and left, and I stood there listening as his footsteps faded down the hall, feeling more exhausted than angry. Through all of it, I kept waiting for Jenna to see the light, to realize how far her mother was pushing things, but if anything, she dug in deeper. She kept saying I was the one tearing the family apart, that I was making her choose between me and them. I told her the choice had been made at that party, when she stood there and let her mother rip me apart. She didn't have a response to that, just more silence, more distance, more blame. And still, I didn't regret what I'd done. I didn't regret protecting what Gordon trusted me to protect. I just wondered how much lower they'd sink before it was over. The longer this dragged on, the clearer it became that Darlene wasn't going to give up without making my life hell in the process. I stopped counting how many times she or Jenna showed up at my building, trying to corner me in the lobby or outside on the sidewalk. Every time I saw that crooked white sedan parked out front, I knew I was in for another round of drama. Sometimes Darlene would sit in the car for hours, just watching, waiting for me to come out so she could start up again. One day, she actually got out as I was coming back from walking the dog. Her eyes red like she hadn't slept in days and went straight for me. No pleasantries, no pretense, just pure desperation. She started yelling before I even reached the stairs, accusing me of ruining Jenna's life, of destroying everything their family had built, like I had some personal vendetta. She kept trying to grab my arm, like if she could just hold on to me physically, she could make me change my mind. I stepped back, told her to leave me alone, told her I wasn't going to reverse what I'd done just because she was making a scene. Her voice cracked when she begged, said she'd do anything if I just released the funds. That was when Jenna showed up, looking furious, like I was the villain for not giving in. They both started shouting over each other, and I just shook my head, told them both the same thing I'd said before. If they wanted the money, they needed to own up, to make a public apology for what they'd done at the party. Darlene froze, stunned that I'd repeated. Jenna glared at me like she couldn't believe I'd actually stand firm. Then they left, slamming the door behind them so hard it rattled the whole building. The aftermath wasn't any quieter. Darlene shifted tactics and started telling anyone who listened that I'd stolen from her, that I was holding the family hostage out of spite. She posted cryptic things online about betrayal and heartbreak, and of course people started messaging me, asking what was going on, some offering support, some accusing me of things I hadn't done. It was exhausting, trying to keep my head down, trying not to engage with the people who didn't really care about the truth, just about the spectacle. Even people at work started looking at me differently, whispering when I passed, asking subtle questions about whether everything was okay at home. I kept my answers short, told them family was complicated, and moved on, but I could feel their curiosity like a weight. Meanwhile, Darlene's situation was crumbling fast. Without access to the trust, she couldn't keep up the lifestyle she'd built around it. I started hearing from people, mutual acquaintances, even neighbors, that she was trying to take out loans, sell jewelry, rent out parts of her property, anything to stay afloat. But her credit was garbage without the trust backing her up, and nobody wanted to touch her with a 10-foot pole. Jenna texted me at all hours, sometimes begging, sometimes furious, sometimes just silent for days before starting the cycle again. She said I was heartless, that I was making her mother sick, that I was the reason they were losing everything. I reminded her that they'd done this to themselves, that none of this would be happening if they'd shown even an ounce of respect that night. That never went over well. She'd accuse me of being cold, of trying to punish them, of not loving her enough to forgive. The irony of that never seemed to occur to her. Walker kept trying to insert himself into it, showing up unannounced, trying to get me to back down. He said I was tearing the family apart, that I needed to stop acting like I was better than them, that real men fix problems, not create them. I told him through the door that if he wanted to fix anything, he should talk to his aunt, not me. He stormed off, muttering threats about how I'd regret this, how I'd made enemies for life. At that point, I'd stopped caring about the threats, about the gossip, about the judgment. The only thing that mattered was standing my ground, proving that I wasn't going to let them walk all over me again. Then Darlene tried to get legal with it. Carla kept me updated, told me that Darlene had tried to hire lawyers to challenge the trust, to claim I was unfit to manage it. But Gordon had been smart, had written everything so tight that there wasn't a crack to slip through. Every email, every letter, every document was in order. There was nothing for them to use against me. Carla warned me that wouldn't stop them from trying to stir up trouble, from spreading lies, from making my life as difficult as possible. I told her I was ready for it, that I'd come this far and wasn't about to fold because they were loud. The worst was when they started dragging my parents into it, trying to turn them against me, trying to make it seem like I'd lost my mind. Darlene sent my mom these long, dramatic messages about how I was unstable, how I needed help, how I was ruining Jenna's life. My mom called, worried, wanting to know what was really going on. I told her everything, from the speech at the party to the endless harassment afterward. She sighed, told me she had no idea it had gotten this bad, warned me again to be careful because people like Darlene don't lose quietly. I appreciated that she believed me, that she didn't try to tell me to back down just to keep the peace. Even with everything happening, I kept hoping Jenna would see reason, would realize that her mother was dragging this out, making everything worse. But if anything, she doubled down. She showed up at my apartment again one evening, stood there in the living room, arms crossed, demanding to know if I was really going to let this go on, really going to let her mother lose everything over what she called a stupid joke. I told her it wasn't a joke, not to me, not after everything. She said her mother was desperate, couldn't pay her bills, that I was pushing them into ruin. I told her that wasn't my problem, that they'd made this mess themselves. She snapped, shoved me, and stormed out, slamming the door behind her so hard it shook the pictures on the wall. After that, the visits slowed, but the messages didn't. Darlene and Jenna tried every trick in the book, pleading, threatening, guilting, even dragging in random friends and distant relatives to pile on. I stopped answering most of them, stopped letting the noise get to me. They could say whatever they wanted. I knew what really happened, and I wasn't going to let them rewrite the story just because they didn't like how it turned out. They'd pushed me too far, and now they were learning what it felt like to have no power left to push back. It was strange how quiet things got after that last blow-up in my apartment. I thought maybe they'd finally realized I wasn't going to budge, that I wasn't going to let them guilt or shame me into backing down. But deep down, I knew Darlene too well to believe she'd give up so easily. Sure enough, within a few days, I started noticing her car parked out front again, like she was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Sometimes she'd sit there for hours, engine off, staring up at my windows like that alone would make me change my mind. It didn't scare me exactly, but it did make me more careful about when I came and went, always checking first to see if she was lurking nearby. One evening, just as the sun was starting to set, I came back from walking the dog and saw both Darlene and Jenna standing near the entrance, like they'd been lying in wait. I didn't even make it up the steps before they both descended on me. Darlene leading the charge with tears streaming down her face, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and desperation. She kept begging, saying she was losing everything, that her house was on the line, that the family name was crumbling because of me. Jenna stood behind her, arms folded, glaring at me like I was the villain in all this, like I was the one who'd started it. Darlene tried grabbing my arm again, and I stepped back, tired of the same scene playing out over and over. I told them both that nothing had changed, that I wasn't going to unfreeze anything until they owned what they'd done. I said it as calmly as I could, but the weight of everything they'd put me through made my voice shake. That was when Darlene broke completely. Right there on the sidewalk, she dropped to her knees, sobbing, grabbing at my shoes, promising anything if I'd just give her the money back. She said she'd apologize, she'd crawl if that's what it took, she'd make it right. People walking by started slowing down, watching the scene like it was some kind of show. I could feel my neighbors peeking through their windows, probably thinking I was some kind of monster for letting this play out. But I didn't care about the audience anymore. I shook her off, told her I wasn't interested in theatrics, and walked inside without looking back. That night, Jenna sent me a string of messages that started off furious, then turned to desperate, and finally ended with her accusing me of enjoying watching them suffer. I didn't answer any of them. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said. Darlene left a long voicemail, voice raw from crying, telling me how she was losing everything, her house, her friends, even her health, and that it was all my fault. I deleted it without listening to the end. I sat on the couch with the dog, the quiet of the apartment feeling heavier than usual, and I realized just how far we'd all let this go. But even in that quiet, I knew I wasn't the one who'd lit the match. They'd done that the night they chose to humiliate me, and now they were choking on the smoke. Word of what happened on the sidewalk spread fast. I started getting messages from people I barely knew, some scolding me, some trying to get the full story, most just fishing for gossip. Walker texted to say I'd finally proven how heartless I was, that I'd ruined the family name, and that nobody would ever forgive me for what I'd done. I didn't even bother replying. If he wanted to believe Darlene's version of the story, that was on him. I wasn't wasting any more breath trying to explain myself to people who didn't actually want to understand. I just kept my head down, kept walking the dog, kept going to work, kept waiting for the next move in what felt like an endless game. Meanwhile, Darlene's situation went from bad to worse. I heard from Carla that Darlene had tried every trick she could think of to get around the trust. She tried to get loans against her house, tried to pawn jewelry, even tried to rent out her pool house. But nobody wanted to touch her anymore. Without the trust backing her up, she had no credibility, no stability, nothing to offer but promises nobody believed. Carla warned me that Darlene might try one last desperate move, something reckless, and I told her I was ready for whatever came next. I wasn't going to let them win, not after everything they'd done. Then, just when I thought I'd seen it all, Darlene showed up one last time. This time, she came alone, no Jenna by her side, no backup, no pretense of pride left. She looked exhausted, like the fight had drained everything out of her. She didn't bother yelling this time. She just stood there, eyes rimmed with red, voice barely above a whisper, asking if I'd please reconsider. She said she'd do anything, that she couldn't take it anymore, that she was begging me not as the proud matriarch she'd always pretended to be, but as a mother who was watching her life fall apart. I felt bad for a split second, but then I remembered the smirk on her face at that party, the way she'd basked in the laughter at my expense, and the guilt faded. I told her the same thing I'd told her before. If she wanted the money, if she wanted the trust restored, she knew what she had to do. A real apology, in public, in front of everyone who'd seen what she'd done, not some whispered half-truth behind closed doors. She hesitated, tears spilling down her face, and for a second I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd do it. But then she shook her head, wiped her eyes, and turned to leave. I watched her walk away, shoulders slumped, and I knew that whatever came next, it was on her. I had offered a path to redemption, and she'd chosen pride over peace. That night was the quietest in months. No messages, no calls, no unexpected visitors. Just silence. I sat there, staring out the window at the empty street, wondering how long it would last, wondering what their next move would be. Because with Darlene, I knew the storm was never really over. She was the type to burn everything down before she'd admit she lost, and I had a sinking feeling that this was just the calm before the next fire. For a few weeks, things stayed unusually quiet, almost like Darlene and Jenna had finally given up the fight. I let myself believe, just for a moment, that maybe they were too exhausted to keep pushing, that maybe they had finally realized they couldn't bully or guilt their way out of this. I spent my evenings walking the dog in peace, enjoying the first real calm I'd had in months. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was too easy, that Darlene wasn't finished yet. People like her don't just fade away. They regroup, they scheme, and they wait for their moment to strike back harder. Then one afternoon, as I was sorting through the mail, I found a thick envelope from a name I didn't recognize. It turned out to be from Gordon's personal assistant, someone I hadn't heard from since just after Gordon passed. I opened it expecting maybe some final paperwork or a forgotten thank you note. Instead, what I found made my stomach drop. Gordon, in one of his last private meetings with his assistant, had amended the trust documents in a way I never saw coming. Buried in the legal jargon was a clause that said if the trust was ever frozen for longer than 6 months, control would automatically transfer to his closest surviving blood relative. That person, of course, was Darlene. I sat there at my kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands, rereading the words over and over, hoping I'd misunderstood. But no matter how many times I went through it, the meaning stayed the same. I thought I had outplayed Darlene, thought I had finally stood up and protected what Gordon wanted safe. Instead, I'd walked right into a trap that had been set before I even knew there was a game being played. The deadline was less than a week away, and there wasn't a thing I could do about it without looking like I was trying to keep the trust frozen purely out of spite. I called Carla immediately, told her everything, asked if there was any way around it. She went through the paperwork, double-checked every line, and then called me back with the same answer I already knew was coming. Gordon's last amendment was clear, binding, and unchallengeable. The clause would activate on its own unless I acted to unfreeze the trust before the deadline. That meant Darlene would get control, and there would be nothing I could do to stop her. Carla offered to help draft a statement, something that would make it clear I was stepping down voluntarily to honor Gordon's wishes, but I barely heard her. I was too busy thinking about what would happen once Darlene had everything back in her hands. Sure enough, within days of the transfer, Darlene went public with her victory. She held a charity gala at a downtown hotel, all glitz and lights, all smiles and handshakes, as if the last few months had never happened. She gave a speech about forgiveness, about family, about overcoming hardship with grace, and people ate it up. I sat at a quiet cafe, watching the live stream on my phone, listening as she painted herself as the gracious matriarch who had endured so much betrayal but chose to rise above it. She didn't mention my name once, but every word was a jab, every polished sentence a reminder that in the eyes of her world, I'd lost. The phone buzzing on the table next to me broke my trance. When I glanced down and saw Jenna's name on the screen, I nearly laughed at the absurdity of it. After everything, now she wanted to talk? I stared at the name for a long moment, then let it ring out, not ready to hear whatever script she had prepared. Maybe she wanted to gloat. Maybe she wanted to offer some empty gesture of reconciliation. Maybe she wanted something else entirely. It didn't matter. The truth was, I didn't trust her anymore, and I sure as hell didn't trust that whatever she had to say was for my benefit. Over the next few days, I kept expecting the other shoe to drop. Maybe I thought Darlene would come after me legally, try to sue for defamation or emotional distress, or maybe just spread more lies until every last shred of my reputation was gone. Instead, something even stranger happened. The noise stopped. No more cars parked out front. No more surprise visits or ambushes in the lobby. No more cryptic social media posts or calls from distant relatives trying to guilt-trip me into making things right. It was like, once Darlene had what she wanted, I didn't matter anymore. I was no longer a threat, just another nobody in the rearview mirror of her perfect, curated life. At first, I didn't know what to do with the silence. After so many months of constant tension, it felt unnatural. I kept waiting for a knock on the door, a letter in the mail, some sign that the fight wasn't really over. But nothing came. Just the empty quiet of a battle that I thought I'd won, but really had never stood a chance of winning in the first place. I started focusing on putting myself back together, figuring out who I was without the constant noise of their demands and insults in my ear. I reconnected with old friends, started hitting the gym again, took the dog on longer walks through the park, trying to remember what peace felt like. Then, just when I thought I was finally in the clear, Jenna showed up unannounced. She looked different, like the months of stress had worn her down, like the glow she used to have from being her mother's golden child had faded. She didn't try to push her way inside this time. She just stood there in the doorway, hands shoved deep into her coat pockets, and asked if we could talk. Against my better judgment, I let her in, mostly because I wanted to hear what angle she was playing now. She sat on the edge of the couch, looking like she wasn't sure where to start, and finally said she missed me, that she hated how everything turned out, that maybe we could find a way back to what we had. I listened, but I didn't trust a word of it. I asked if Darlene knew she was here, and Jenna didn't answer, just stared at the floor like she didn't want to admit the truth. I asked if this was about her or about what she thought she could still get from me. That one stung. She flinched like I'd slapped her. She tried to say it wasn't like that she'd made mistakes, that she saw now how wrong her mother had been. But I could see through it, could hear the same patterns in her voice that had always been there. I told her I wished her well, but I wasn't interested in trying again, not after everything that had happened. She didn't cry, didn't yell, didn't beg. She just nodded, stood up, and left without another word. I closed the door behind her and leaned against it for a long time, listening to the sound of her footsteps fading down the hall. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like maybe I'd finally won something after all. It wasn't the trust, it wasn't the money, and it sure as hell wasn't Darlene's respect. But it was my freedom. And that was worth more than all of it combined.